Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, my hometown, out there on the prairie. It's been just the most beautiful weather. It's been perfect, the sort of weather that San Diego and Hawaii get all year round. We get for about 2 weeks in June. It's been highs in the 80s and lows in the 60s. The corn is coming up. The mood there in the Chatterbox Cafe was very cheerful all this last week. We're just giving Clint Bunsen a hard time about his trip that he's taking with Irene and some others in about 1 month to Norway and to Stockholm. They said, well, Clint, going off on a vacation trip over there, you must have sold a lot of Fords this last year and not given very big discounts, I guess. Yep, you must have quite a markup, I'd say. People take a dim view of extravagance in Lake Wobegon, and to travel someplace where you do not have relatives to stay over with is frowned on by most. You can travel off someplace for your niece's wedding or your aunt's funeral, but just to higgledy-piggledy go off to some foreign country just to see it, I mean, that's what you subscribe to the National Geographic for, you know? Irene has planned this whole trip, and so to protect them a little bit from resentment, she's organized a little group to go. Clint and Irene are going, and Clarence and Arlene Bunsen are going, and then they got the Headlands, Roger and Marilyn to go, so you've got 6 people, so it doesn't look as if you're trying to get away from home. And then Clarence thought that he might like to invite Mayor Eloise Krebsbach and have her come along. Well, fine, they said. How could they say no? And then the Headlands thought it would be awfully nice if Pastor and Judy Inkvist came along on the trip. Well, okay, fine, you go ahead and invite them. They were very relieved, all of them, when David and Judy said they could not come. To go on a trip with your pastor does put you under a certain pressure to be a little more spiritually thoughtful than you ordinarily would be, and to say some kind of grace before meals. You can't just look up at the ceiling and say, hey, appreciate that. You got to say something. And Clarence does like the occasional martini, and of course the purpose of going away on a trip like this is to be able to speak frankly about your neighbors, so they were glad the Inkvist could not come. And then Eloise asked if her boyfriend, the fireman Bob, could come along on the trip. Well, to have an unmarried couple on this trip made people feel uneasy, but they didn't know how to say no, so there they were. And then David and Judy decided they could come, and so now suddenly the group had grown from 7 people to 10 people. And when you go up to 10 people, now you need organization and planning, and you're going to have to organize. Now, you people go up to the brewery this morning, and you people go to the art museum, and you people take the incline railway up to the top of the mountain, and you'll stay in your hotel room and watch CNN, and then we'll meet for lunch. Now, what kind of lunch do we want? You have to plan all of this. And it would fall to Irene to plan the whole thing because it was her idea. She wondered, why in the world? Why did I ever suggest Norway? I mean, all you find there are people who are a lot like people here, except even more so. Just find a lot of people sitting around and eating those big slabs of herring that look like somebody's tongue, and drinking snaps. And thought of going with this group depressed her a little bit, especially going with Bob. Why does a person make so many jokes about bodily functions as this man does? What's wrong with his upbringing? She thought about this as she sat at high school graduation, as the commencement speaker urged the class of 1997 to be brave and to follow their dreams. Irene thought to herself, why didn't I suggest South Africa or Israel or Japan or someplace I have no idea what it looks like? Why go to a country where I'm just going to see a lot of large, white, phlegmatic people eating herring? She was at the graduation because their youngest daughter, Anna, graduated. Their little girl, the last one out of the nest. She graduated on Saturday, and then she left on Sunday in a van with a boy and 2 girls from Brainerd going out to Colorado. She has a job for the summer in a Lutheran dude ranch out there. It's called the Lazy Zion, and it's like other dude ranches, except that the horses are slower. There's no galloping at a Lutheran dude ranch, and the horses stay right on the trail. You can pull their heads any way you want. They stay right on the trail. There could be a landslide, an avalanche. Those horses would stay right where that trail had been. It was so sad to see this sweet child go. She was the sweetest kid in the family. The youngest child so often is, you know. The parents get tired of being parents by the time the youngest child comes along. They give up on everything. There's no more discipline. And the youngest one grows up bright and cheerful and kind and everything you'd want a child to be. Here she was taking off. They stood outside on their front steps, Irene and Clint, and they watched that van go down the street, and they saw it kind of veer to the right, just drift to the right until the right wheels were up on the grass on the boulevard. And then it swerved back to the left, and then he made a right-hand turn, and the moment that car disappeared out of sight, there was a loud honk. And Irene clapped her hand to her heart, and the moment she did, she noticed a lump in her left breast. She felt it, and it hadn't been there before. Clint said, "Well, now it's just you and me." "Shall I go get the leather straps and the Mazola oil? What do you say?" She said, "Church is in 20 minutes, and you haven't taken a shower yet." She sat in church, and during prayer, she said, "God, don't do this to me. To get breast cancer the day that your youngest child leaves home is cheap irony, God. It's beneath you. You should not even think about doing this." She made an appointment with Dr. DeHaven in town on Monday. She went down to see him after a sleepless night. He took a look, and then he said what he says usually. He says, "Well, it may not be anything. Let's keep an eye on it and see what develops." The man is a fatalist. He always has been one. A man that heavy who drinks as much as he does and smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day is a fatalist. He doesn't really believe in health. When he says you may be okay, it makes you feel worse. So she called a friend down in the cities whom she knew through church work and who was married to an internist, and she made an appointment to see a doctor in Minneapolis on Tuesday. She told Clint that she was going down to the city, to the university, to do research on which valley in Norway the Bunsen family came from. And then she got in her car and she drove down on Tuesday morning. It was a beautiful day, and her heart was pounding all the way to the city. She got off the freeway. She immediately got lost. She drifted around the neighborhood by the Guthrie Theater. She saw a gang of school children on a field trip, all horsing around and laughing and joking. And she thought to herself, "I was once like you children, and now I'm thinking about leaving this world." She asked directions from 2 women in a car which was the way to Abbott Hospital, and the moment she mentioned hospital, their faces got serious. They directed her. She arrived in plenty of time. She had had allowed extra time to get really lost in, and she'd just gotten a little lost. She parked in the parking lot, and she walked into the lobby of the building, and she pressed the button for the elevator. A moment later, the doors opened, and a young man walked out, and she walked in, and the moment she got in, she realized that there was this noxious, terrible fume that he had left behind in this elevator, this horrific fart that he had let. Oh, this was no ordinary piece of work. This was the fart of the Nibelungs. This was War and Peace. This was monumental. This was Aristotle contemplating the butt of Homer. This was gigantic. Oh, she pressed the button for the 14th floor. She stood there not even breathing. The elevator stopped at the 3rd floor. An older man got on. He looked at her and his nose twitched. He took a step away from her. They rode up. It stopped on the 8th floor. A woman and her little boy got on. The little boy said, "P.U." The old man said, "That's not mine, sonny." Everybody else got off on the 11th floor. It stopped again on the 12th floor. A nurse got on the 12th floor. She looked at Irene. She said, "Gastroenterology is on 8." She got off. She sat in the waiting room. She sat there for half an hour reading the usual trash that you find there. Why ever do people think that if you are in a serious medical situation, do you want to sit and read more about Michael Jackson's child? I don't know. But she sat until the doctor called her in. There was a mammogram, and he talked to her a little bit, and then a nurse talked to her for a while. She saw the nurse write down on a slip of paper the word hospice. And then she looked again, and it didn't say hospice, it said Bunsen. The nurse said that probably it was nothing, but they would take a little tissue sample, and she got out a needle, and she plunged it into Irene's breast, and she bandaged it. And Irene left filled with fear, filled with horror. She drove home. She felt too bad to drive straight home. She stopped in a little town with just 2 bars. There were just 2 bars on either side of the road, and a church and some scattered houses. She walked into one of the bars. There were 4 women in there. They were playing pool. They were drinking beer. It was early in the afternoon. There was a woman behind the bar. Irene asked for ginger ale, and then she thought, no, beer. Why not? My mother's been dead 15 years. Who's to see? She said, why are there 2 bars in this little town? The lady bartender said, the other bar across the road, that's the men's bar. Well, what do you do if a man comes in here? Well, if he's with a woman, he can stay and have 1 drink. Then he has to go. If he's alone, he has to go across the street. You from the cities? No, Irene said. I just came from the cities. I went down there to see a doctor. I have a lump on my breast. Oh, bartender said. I know what that's like. I went through that myself. That's a scary thing. But you know, it turned out to be the best time of my life. It's about 10 years ago. I just got rid of all of the BS in my life, just right at that moment. I threw it all overboard. I used to be in politics. I got out of it, quit everything. I bought myself a horse. I'd always wanted to have a horse. And I took the horse out to Montana. We spent 3 weeks on a riding trip. Most fun I've had in my entire life. I had a little bit of a romance. I'm going back in 2 weeks. Irene thought about when she and Clint had a little bit of a romance when they got married. He was driving a Nash Roadster, and they left after the reception, and she changed into her going away outfit. It was a navy blue rayon thing, had been picked out by her mother. It was terribly uncomfortable. And both of them were a little mad. And Clint got tired of the tin cans rattling behind the car, and he pulled over to the side of the road to take them off. And it took him a while, and while he was working on that, Irene tried to get out of this outfit and get into something comfortable. And when he came back into the car, she was about 2/3 undressed. he sat in the car, and in that Nash, the front seats folded back to make a bed with the back seat. She hit something with her hand, and suddenly she was prone. And about 10 minutes after that, they were both of them naked. Now, he'd parked on top of a hill because the car did not start well. So if it wouldn't start, he wanted to be able to coast start it. And there they were, and they were filled with joy and relief and finally at being naked together. And she kicked the brake lever. And it started to roll, and he panicked, and he was lying on his side, so he didn't have a good sense of direction. And he reached up for the wheel, and he steered them right into the ditch. It was a very deep ditch, and they drove down and sat there in the bottom of it and spent the night there. They were awakened early in the morning by sheriff's deputies knocking on the window. Her mother had called ahead to the hotel, and when they didn't show up, she panicked, and she called out search teams, and she got people from church out looking for them, and the whole town. So it was a story that never died, ever. To her mother, everything was a crisis. Her mother loved crises. Her mother loved other people's sicknesses. Her mother was devoted to death her entire life. Well, not me, said Irene. Not me. She was not going to tell Clint where she had gone. And if he asked about that bruise on her breast, she was going to tell him that she'd gone to a store to try on dresses, and she had accidentally stabbed herself with a coat hanger. And then he did not ask. And he did not ask. She never got a chance to tell him the story. Even after the call came from Minneapolis to say that it was not malignant, she still thought to herself, this is going to be the most wonderful summer. I am going to make this a wonderful summer. I have been a mother for almost 30 years, and now I'm going to try a little bit of narcissism. I'm going to go to Norway, and I'm going to climb mountains. I am going to drink a little bit, which I haven't done for years. I am going to stay in the best hotel in Stockholm. And if anybody says anything about it, that's the last thing they'll say for a while. That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.